That was Ice Cream on the Beach, and I'm joined by the directors, Michael Holliday and Alexander Churchyard. Hi guys, how you doing?
Hiya.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Thanks for letting us screen the film. You know, it's great. Could you just run through exactly where Ice Cream on the Beach came from?
I'll blame that on Alex, so he can explain that.
Yeah, so it has like a really long and convoluted history, but to cut a really long story short, when I was younger, I used to make these little kind of mini horror films with something called a Tyco video cam, which was basically a video camera made by the toy company Tyco, and it used to go straight into your VCR and you used to record straight onto tape. But yeah, we used to make these films. You've seen the films, so we used to make these films called Killer Socks. And so over the years, sorry.
Yeah, so you made more than one film about Killer Socks?
He's made a lot of films about Killer Socks.
Loads of Killer Sock films.
Okay.
And, yes. Yeah, I met Mike and I started to make him be in Killer Socks films.
Yeah, this is when we were about 16, so this is going back a good 16 years now. I got involved, so.
And then I tried to write a feature called Killer Socks.
Basically, he told me he'd been working on a feature film and I didn't know what it was, and it ultimately that script became Ice Cream on the Beach. But I was just like, oh, okay, cool. So what have you wrote? And he just handed me the script and it just said Killer Socks the movie. And this is, a decade after I'd done the first silly short film with him, and 25 years since he'd started doing them as well. And I was just like, okay, we're going back here again.
Didn't try to hide it like the film, obviously, where you go through the whole film, then suddenly there's a big twist.
No. This was just socks.
Yeah, you read the first 100 pages and then it's like, yeah, Killer Socks. Yeah.
I managed to do exactly that to my mum though, because she didn't know what it was, and she even came to set during the pub stuff. She was like an extra, and she was like, "Oh, it's really good that you've moved on from Killer Socks." And I was like,
until the night of the premiere. But yeah, no. So Alex came to me with this script, and it was a lot more like a 90s inspired sort of slasher movie instead of what ultimately it became. And it was a lot more focused on these sort of sock creatures taking people over and that sort of thing. And then I think we spent probably about 3 years on it bit by bit, because we were working together as editors, and we'd sort of finish our work for the day. We'd go to the local pub and we'd just start writing. And gradually that script sort of warped into this sort of strange sort of seaside town 80s sort of giallo slasher movie. And yeah.
Unsurprisingly, a lot of it is set in a pub because most of it was
written in the pub, yeah.
And it's actually, obviously you guys are from Southend as well, I presume, are you?
Yes, yeah. So we said that we've done a lot of short films and stuff together in the past that weren't just Killer Socks, but we've never actually utilised that as a sort of set, like the seafront and the sea and all that sort of stuff. And I don't know why we never had, and it just never really occurred to us. And we were trying to work out a nice location to set this in. And we were like, well, why don't we set it in like a little sort of fishing village? Because there's loads of great locations near us for that sort of thing. And that's how it sort of came about.
Brilliant. You obviously love VHS, or I assume you love VHS. Can you give us just run through a few of the methods you'd use to try and make this film look like it's from the 80s or 90s?
Yeah, so we initially did a lot of test footage for this, so going back about 5 years ago now, and actually probably better to explain how we went through that process. But the idea initially was to actually just sort of take the digital footage and run it through a VHS, but because we wanted it in widescreen rather than 4:3, that posed quite a few technical challenges.
Yeah.
And so you experimented with it for a long time, weren't you, Alex? And then I think once we realized how complicated the feature was going to be, it was just this sort of added thing that we couldn't was a sort of too much of a distraction. But at the same time, we wanted it to feel really authentic. We didn't want it to feel like it was just sort of a digital effect. So I think what's on the film now is mostly sort of VHS scans that people have done. And then we've sort of overlaid that across the entire film and sort of played around and had tracking in and stuff.
Kind of wanted to make it look awful, but also it's still HD, kind of.
Is it easier to make something look awful? Sorry, I've phrased that question really, really badly. Obviously, you're trying to make a good film. Is it really hard to make it look awful? Are you I don't want to make it look bad? Not awful, you know. Obviously,
There are moments with the film where we were watching it in the edit room, and like obviously we've seen this film so many times now, and every now and again we sort of see a bit of the footage before it was sort of effectively downgraded, and we're like, it just looks like a completely different film. It's really surreal to see it, because like in my head I just picture it as this VHS film now, and like it's sort of that sort of like quality to it. I can't really picture it as a sort of like nice looking HD film.
Yeah, it was hard to like ruin some bits of it, wasn't it? Because they did actually look quite nice.
It's like, oh, we've actually managed to make a nice looking shot for once, right? Let's make it look crap. And yeah.
So you're consciously trying to make a bad film. That's like
yeah. And like, I guess conversely, if we do make a mistake, it kind of just adds to it. So
yeah, I mean, there were definitely times where we'd notice, oh, that's wrong, should we fix it? And we're like, no, it adds to the creativity.
Was it, obviously it's a low budget film.
Yeah.
Did you use the 80s style to sort of get over the shortcomings of a low budget film, or was it always the case that you wanted to make that style film?
I think probably the opposite was true, right? Because so like we always wanted it to be like I said, initially it was like more set in the 90s and more sort of 90s influenced, and as the script progressed it sort of became a bit more influenced by the 70s and 80s. But like it wasn't really a budget thing, it was just like we really liked that style, we wanted it to be that. But I think we sort of came across issues with the budget being so low, trying to make it actually authentically feel like it's set in the 80s. So I think Alex spent a lot of time, particularly at like boot sales and stuff like that, didn't you, trying to find like good props and things like this?
Yeah, and like everything's, all the clothes are from like charity shops, and yeah.
But yeah, just like obviously you can't like go into a location and remove all of the items that are modern. So it was kind of trying to work out creative solutions to those problems.
Like cars and things, isn't it? It was so hard to not.
Yeah, trying to shoot around cars and traffic. Like the pub we shot in, we couldn't remove the beer pumps, which were all very modern. So Alex decided out the idea for some reason to replace them with fish. So if you look carefully in the film, all the beer pumps are actually just fish.
Watch it again. I knew I was going to have to watch it again. Overdubbing. The overdubbing's great as well. That, you know, was that again? You know, it's the same sort of question. But did you find yourself thinking, oh, that's out of sync, I need to move that over, or did you like, no, leave it?
So everything is like post-dubbed. So there's no on-set audio in the film at all.
Yeah.
So we brought everybody back and re-recorded all of their dialogue, and like it was something we wanted to do creatively from the start. But we thought, oh, that's going to be a lot of effort. And then we found that there were some bits where we were going to need to do it anyway. And we got to this stage where we were like, let's just go for it. So, yeah, so like, we didn't do it like the way you should do dubbing. Like, we didn't get people to go exact. We just got them to kind of watch it and kind of basically match their performance. So,
yeah, like the dubbing was always supposed to be a bit of a joke, but we were also conscious of the fact that we didn't want it to be like too distracting and too annoying throughout the film. So I think for the most of the main characters, they do try and keep things as close as possible, so it just kind of looked like the dubbing slightly off as opposed to like being completely different. And then there are other characters, like some of the minor ones, who are pretty much, we're getting them to say completely different lines to what we got them to dub later on.
And they use just usually different actors voicing those as well, if that's the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what is it with killer socks? What is it with socks? Why socks?
I don't think he's ever explained that to me either, so
I really don't know. It's just like the stupidest thing you could do. I can't explain it.
The first time we saw this film with an audience, like it was we weren't expecting it, but we actually had quite a big crowd for it. And like the entire time we were watching it, I was so nervous about the ending, because I was like, it's people are going to love it or they're going to hate it. And like, I weren't sure which way they're going to go. And the film does get progressively more and more silly as it goes on. But obviously once it gets to that point, that's kind of like the stupidest bit.
Yeah.
And it was quite nice to I was like leaning into Alex going like, shit, here he comes. And the reveal happened and it actually got a laugh and was like, huge sigh of relief. Okay, people sort of went with it and enjoyed it. But yeah, it's definitely not for everyone.
But then what horror film is, you know?
Exactly.
Lloyd Kaufman, how did he get involved in the film?
Yeah, that's quite a good story actually. Like, so I had done a short film the year before, and I'd met this guy called Philip Rogers who was doing a bunch of press for the festival that the film was playing at, and we sort of got chatting and stuff, and we spoke about films.
You mentioned other festivals, it's okay.
Okay. It was at Horrorthon Festival. But like, so we just chatted about films, and I mentioned we were doing Ice Cream on the Beach, and we was just talking about that, and I mentioned I really like Troma. And he was like, "Oh, I know Lloyd quite well. Would you be interested in getting him involved?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, of course we would." But then, like, sort of time progressed. We were trying to put together this film. There's only the two of us working on it for a lot of it, and this idea of somehow getting Lloyd to come to the UK to shoot a cameo, it just felt like this sort of like overly complicated thing that would take away from the rest of the film. Like, we should focus on that and then kind of ignore this. And then it sort of came up basically that Alex noticed that Lloyd was in the country while we were filming, and you messaged me, didn't you, that evening, and was like, shall I try and see if we can get him to come in? And I was like, yeah, sure, I mean, give it a go, see what happens. And then you messaged Philip, didn't you?
Yeah, so I messaged Philip and I was like, "Oh, do you think we could get Lloyd?" And he was like, "Well, I'm standing next to him, so I'll ask him." And then like 10 minutes later, I'm actually texting Lloyd Kaufman, and I'm like messaging Mike going, "I'm texting Lloyd Kaufman, this is really weird." And we basically like arranged to meet him in central London the next day. And we had no idea, like there was no part really, no script, no location, no anything. So we had to kind of come up with this idea that there's this ghost and we had to write it. And then when we actually got there, we got there about half an hour before he did, and we had to run around trying to get a location to shoot him in.
Yeah, so I was working at the time, like in London at the time. You were sort of like basically rewriting the script sort of on the way up. So effectively, we had to split what was originally one character into two to make this sort of work. And it did all sort of come together. And I think it's one of my favorite bits of the film, so I'm pleased it happened. We were desperately trying to work this out. And we were literally just running into nearby businesses and going, "Please, can you just give us any space to film in? Like, we just need something." And eventually, like, somewhere took us in that we're not allowed to mention. They let us sort of shoot in the sort of back room effectively with Lloyd. And yeah, we got to spend the afternoon with Lloyd and his wife. They told us loads of stories. We had to do all their dubbing in the hotel room. Yeah. It was,
wherever you shot it, did they know who Lloyd was?
They didn't. No, they were like, they liked the fact that he was a film director, but they did not know who he was.
Then they went home and watched a Troma film, yeah,
and was like, "Oh God, what have we done?"
Because we did try and sort of say it like that, didn't we? We were like, "Oh yeah, it's a head of Troma and all this," and they're like,
"What's a Troma?"
Yeah. The Decorator.
Yes.
IMDb tells me that you're actually going to make a film of that. Is that right?
Yeah, hopefully down the line. It's so the Decorator again is sort of like, it was initially just supposed to be a sort of silly in-joke in the film. It was like a friend of ours came up with it while we were at university together, and we as a sort of birthday, he basically got drunk, sat in the middle of the floor and described this ridiculous horror movie trilogy that he had in his mind called The Decorator. And as a treat for his birthday one year, me and Alex actually went off and made a bunch of fake trailers for it and gave it to him. And we was like, "Oh, we'll chuck it in as like a little sort of like a little reference in the film." But what actually ended up happening is, because we got Danny Thompson to appear in that little segment, we filmed that again about 3-4 years before we actually did the main film. And we really loved working with her, and we want to bring her back for like the main film. So we ended up, Decorator ended up becoming like this sort of like side story as a way of bringing Danny into the main film itself. And now we want to do a feature of the Decorator, but we're actually going to be doing the Decorator again in our next film, which is Mosaic.
So we're kind of introducing like a different version of the Decorator. So it's going to be Martin Payne playing him.
Ah, of course.
And
he's in everything.
Yes. Yeah, and then I guess we'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's kind of like a new introduction to him in Mosaic. So
yeah, it's a bit more of a slightly more serious character, I suppose.
Mosaic, you've got a Kickstarter. Is it Kickstarter or is it
Indiegogo?
Indiegogo. Sorry, that's running at the moment. Is that finished yet, or is it? I know you've obviously achieved your target, but
yeah, no, we've still got 2 weeks to go on it. We're a bit blown away with this. Like, the idea was just to sort of like raise a bit of like, it's obviously Ice Cream on the Beach was a no budget film. but there's no such thing really as a no budget film. Like all that money still came out of our pockets each week to sort of pay for all the bits and pieces we needed to do. So we're like, let's just raise a little bit of money just to sort of put into like effects and stuff like that. And we raised the target in 24 hours. We've beaten up this afternoon, we beat our stretch goal, and it's still ticking up. So it's like lovely to see the support that's come through from people.
Well, hopefully everyone who just watched Ice Cream on the Beach loved it. So is there a website address you can throw at them so they can go and have a look at Mosaic? So they can chip in?
Oh, well, just go to, I don't know what the actual page is, but if you just search Indiegogo Mosaic, it will come up as the top result.
It'll find it. Brilliant. Yeah. There's, I mean, obviously speaking to all the guys in the sort of support UK indie horror package, and it's quite a little community that's built, mainly around horror on sea. And it's really interesting to see that all their films are trailered at the start of Ice Cream on the Beach. Is that, do you know these guys? Have you known these guys for years, or is it just from the festival that you've all sort of got together?
So it's a bit of a mixed bag, right? So like initially the trailers at the start was supposed to be fake trailers. Like we actually ran a competition online for people to submit their fake trailers. And then Michael Fausti, who we knew from Horror on Sea, but we'd also actually met him because he sort of doesn't live too far away from here. He's been to a few sort of like cult movie nights that we go to and stuff like that. So we've met him a bunch of times. He sent us the trailer for Dead Celebrities, and obviously like sort of that it's in 4:3. It's got that sort of like old style to it. It's like, oh, that's perfect. And then the guys, Maiko, who did Mask of Fawn, Legacy of Fawn and all that, they had actually pre-made, that's not how the actual film looks, but they released a bunch of their films on VHS, and they made a specific VHS trailer for that. So they sent us that. So yeah, we met them at Horror and Sea, right, Alex?
Yeah.
First time we met them.
I think like, we sort of knew them from going to Horror on Sea, but particularly like this past year since we made Ice Cream on the Beach, like we've been talking to them a lot, haven't we? And their last film, Pandemonium, has like cast crossover with us, so it had like Martin and Danny in it, and then they cast Will as the lead in that, who was one of the sort of smaller characters in our film, but someone we really liked and recommended to them. So it does sort of feel like a little horror family, doesn't it? Like Michael Fausti, who obviously done Exit, which is playing in this block as well. He didn't just submit that trailer. He's actually in the film playing about 5 or 6 different characters, but just as voiceover work. So anytime the TV is playing, he's either the horror host that's introducing a film, or he's playing a character in the film. He does 2 of the trailers at the start, and he also did the voiceover for our actual trailer. So he pops up quite a lot.
Cool. We'll be watching more intently this weekend then. You've already covered what's next. The only other question, I mean, one of the biggest disappointments I've got with this year is we obviously should have been a real life festival. And we're not going to see the reaction to everybody watching the film, which is something I was really looking forward to. Obviously, it's played at some real festivals. How has it gone down? Have people got the joke? Have they loved it? Has it been mixed? What's been the response?
It's probably been, I'd say, mixed, right? It's one thing that one of our actors pointed out to me that I didn't notice the first time we watched it with an audience, and I really picked up on like the second or third time, was like he doesn't think that necessarily everyone gets that it's not meant to be taken particularly seriously at the beginning. And what you do notice that when you're sat there with a live crowd, like you get sort of like little pockets of awkward laughter, and that's about it. And then I think gradually as the film goes on, once it gets to, I think, the sort of murder in the back garden with the exploding head and the brick and the beheading and all that's when people seem to click in, and they're like, oh, actually, I'm on board with this, I get it. And then it seems to get a much better reaction from that point onwards.
Brilliant. Cool. Well, guys, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks for letting us screen the movie.
Thanks for doing it.
No problem at all. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.